Hello, in this video I'll be walking through my thought process in creating this piece that I did in the summer of 2023 without any experience in voiceovering and a script. I'll try not to ramble and be coherent. So now, to start off, we have our protagonist, Do. As with many illustrations that feature Do, you'll see him reading, writing, working on some sort of dissertation, research, and having references laying all over the table and on the floor. He does make a mess, he enjoys the mess, he feels that it's a sort of academic rigor that he manifests in a way. So slightly to the right we have Greta, the gecko. Yes, she's a gecko, not a frog. And she's a handy person, handy lady, if gender is of any relevance. Now she's knitting for everybody in preparation of the winter, even though it's still blazing hot in the summer. And that is the kind of person, creature, gecko, that Greta is. She devotes her time for her friends. Now, at the back, we have Sarah, the sloth, coming back from her afternoon nap. You can see that she takes this sort of sleazy, lazy attitude towards the world and everything else around her, which can be lovely sometimes, but it can bring troubles to her friends as well. Now, let's look at the kitchen where Chat the cat is. So Chat the cat is sort of the motherly, caring person in the group. He's your confidant and you can trust him with any issues that you might have without judgment. And finally, we have Felix, the fox, reading over here. He's the quiet one and he doesn't really speak much, but he cares for his friends, rest assured. Now let's move on to before the sketch was done. I did not record the very beginning of making this sketch because it could fail, and it failed multiple times. I couldn't work out the perspective, I didn't know where to put things, and I was struggling. But by the time this version of the sketch came about, everything seemed okay. So I started recording, doing a screen recording, heated up my iPad very badly. I would put ice pack underneath to stop it from heating up. I think it was using too much, RAM, something like that, not sure. So what I'm doing here is to add line weight to the sketch. What that really means is just to thicken lines at certain specific areas on top of the line work that I'd already done. As a child, I knew how to use line weights. In fact, I used it very often in my sort of pre-teen illustrations. But as I grew older, I became more rigid because I grew more observant of rules, and I wasn't sure whether it would be right, whether it would make sense to add thicker lines to what seemed to me arbitrary places. But in a video that I watched recently, and talking about how to improve your illustrations, I was introduced the concept of line weight again, and this time I had some more explanations. And apparently there are two sort of rules that you use in adding line weight so that it's not arbitrary. It actually has reason and it serves a purpose. So the first rule is to add it in the sort of T places, so where three lines sort of go into one point. What's the word? Can't remember. Anyway, so like the connecting points of where the lines connect. And the second rule is when objects overlap, so you create a sort of natural depth to the piece. So it really served me very well. In the previous illustrations that you might be able to find in my Instagram, there are some that are very lifeless and rigid, and I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. It's just not the sort of natural, smoothing, pleasant to the eye feel that I would like to go for. And now I am doing floorboards. I did attempt to do floorboards in my previous room illustrations, but they never worked because, well, now I know the reasons. This time I have lessened the thickness of my lines, and I've made them less, uniform, and I've changed the opacity to lower so that they're less conspicuous and they become more natural. So I just needed to trust the process and, just making sure that they are there without, complicating the whole illustrations. But anyway, the video has moved on. So now I'm adding gadgets to the kitchen. You can see that I struggle. It's not looking very well, and I had to redraw for various reasons. First of all, it was harder to add sort of free-form items in an isometric illustration. That means that they don't follow the lines of perspective. So you sort of have to calculate, in your mind, feel how they sit and how much depth they show. And second of all, I'm just not a very experienced artist. I have never really received any formal education in art, so it's an ability problem. And thirdly, it was approaching the end of the day, and I was drawing the whole day, and I was having band practice in the middle. It was exhausting, so I gave up in the oven and I went to do some easier jobs, such as adding grass, as you can see, in various places of the sketch. But anyway, I added more books around the space. It's important that we have the space look lived in, and that means a little bit of mess, some sort of illogical placement. Now moving on, we have the shadow coloring going on. I have never been good with light. I have failed multiple times, and I'd say that this time was the very first time that it worked slightly. There were wrong placements of lights here and there, but then I can't be perfectionist, otherwise I'll never create anything. But nevertheless, for this piece, I tried to do shadowing for 3 times as well. This is second. The minute before, it was the first round, and this is the second round. I was trying multiple brushes and multiple sort of procedure steps and adding the light and the shadow. I couldn't figure it out. I didn't have it in my mind, and there were places that didn't make sense, and I was being pedantic or anal about certain lights. So you can see that I tried many different ways, and these lines are completely wrong. These lines that you're looking at, it's completely wrong. And very soon I changed to other lines, and these lines seem to make sense, and these are the lines that I eventually used. But it was fun. So the takeaway, I'd say, is to know where you want the light to go before you start placing the characters that you'd like to be in focus. So for this piece, you can see that Sarah, Doe, and Greta are very much in the light. But for Felix the fox and Chat the cat, they're really in the dark. And light is not supposed to reach them realistically, but this is an illustration, it's not real. So I tried to manipulate the light to eventually at least reach them a bit so that they're not completely in the dark. It was too late for me to change the placement for them, and I've embraced this mistake. I've learned my lesson, and for future illustrations, I will make sure to know where I want my characters to be and where the light will accordingly fall. Now back to the video. What I'm now doing is just to determine where and how the light would fall on each object. And the great thing about doing illustrations is that it's not real. So you have a sort of creative liberty to determine where and how light should be portrayed. It doesn't matter as long as it looks pleasing to the eyes and it's rich, it's interesting. And now on the screen we have our third attempt in figuring how light should go into the house, to the community hall. I used a softer brush, so this creates a gradient light from the dark to the bright. It's closer to how we perceive the world with our real own eyes in the real world. And I think it turned out very well. Chat the cat and Felix the fox can also benefit from this as well, even though it doesn't really make sense for Chat the cat, but let it go, it's okay. After adding the white bits, I return to adding the darker bits in areas where the light absolutely would not touch the object. For example, Sarah the sloth here and her shadow, the other side of the chair, and other side of the fruits and breads and of Greta right now. You can see that it's tempting to add lights to certain other places to not have the heavy look, but I try to control myself, try to be rational, trust the process. Again, that's the motto, I believe. And as we're looking at me adding shadow, perhaps I can talk about how long it took me to do this illustration. It took me about a week, and there were days when I worked 5-6 hours, and there were days I worked like 2 hours, 3 hours at tops. So maybe it took around 20 hours in total, and I'd say it's not too bad for someone who is not trained, not professional, have to figure out everything while I do it. I'd say it's not too bad, and I think it was enjoyable. It made me want to wake up very early in the morning, and it made me not want to sleep. It even made me not want to go out to see my own friends and just be with the illustrations. And now I'm still doing the shadow. You can see that I went back and forth with the curtains. I don't know whether the curtains would have any light. I wanted them to be bright because I wanted that sheer feeling to the fabric, and I think it turned out okay. The great thing about illustrations as opposed to academic drawing or classical drawing is that it's all semiotic. It's all signs and symbols and interpretations that we have learned to accord to certain things that we look at. For example, the plants, they're just a bob of lines, but they look like plants to us, and that's all it takes for illustrators to figure out like what kind of symbols, what kind of shapes and forms can inform our audience, that these are things that we want to represent. And of course everything is put in context. For example, the fruits and bread in the middle of the table. Clearly, if you don't have a bowl, it will never look like fruits or anything other than random lines. So the question I often find myself asking is how to balance between, insisting on something to look real, realistic, close to life, and to make something just, be sort of the form and the shape and let go of the details, because too much detail, it destroys the entirety of the illustrations. It will end up lacking in coherence and it will become less convincing in turn. A problem specific to digital illustration is that you can zoom in. In fact, it's not an option. You have to zoom in because you're working in a 13-inch space with an Apple Pencil that is very good in terms of pressure and precision, but still it's not a pencil. the nib is duller than your usual pencil, and it gets duller as you use it, you wear it out. So when you work on details, you have to zoom in. But the other edge of the sword of the zooming in function is that you add too much detail that you're not supposed to add. You're not supposed to see the detailed creases of the floorboards or of the bed that you see from a distance. So this is a fine balance. It took me a long while to at least recognize the problems, let alone to understand and grasp the balance. But I'm working on it. And now I am coloring. It was fun. This was the first time I colored with a layer of shadow on top, rather than, switching off the shadow layer and just do the colors. I realized that it makes the color pop better. And I'm not sure whether this is the good way or the correct way, but as long as the colors look fine beneath the shadow layer, I am fine with it. And admittedly, without the shadow layer, the colors are actually not great. It's very bright and it's very loud, and they're very saturated because the color have to show through the shadow layer. You can see a glimpse here. See how saturated, how yellow, how warm everything is, because my shadow layer is blue. It's cold. But anyway, it worked well. At first, it took some time for me to choose colors from the palette as they appear and apply them to the objects, because with the shadow layer, say blue becomes bluer and green becomes less green, more blue, and red becomes sort of purple-ish. So they never come out as you would expect if you only look at the palette plate. But after some time, I realized how the color would change, and it became easier. And the great thing about painting objects is that they are supposed to be not so coordinated. They are supposed to come with some sort of surprises, because in our daily life, we don't usually choose one piece of furniture with reference to other pieces of furniture that we already own. So some discoordination, if that's a word, is warranted. Now to the library, you can see that I painted the books in fantasy colors. This was for a number of reasons. First of all, I've tried to color books one by one on the shelf before, and they never come out right. They look dull and they look sort of monotonous, uncoordinated. Second of all, I didn't think that it would be wise for me to take the time and effort in choosing a set of color for each book on the shelves, especially if you zoom out. The library is a relatively small part and perhaps less interesting part of the illustration. So I decided to go with these fantasy colors, and they look great. Not to mention, they are coherent with the colors of the all too nice universe. So I think I will adopt this lazy route in the future when I have to draw books again. And now I'm adding shadows to the floorboards with reference to the items placed on top of them, adding light to give them life. And no, this is not an editing error. I did redo the whole floorboard. This was because after adding colors to the items on top, I realized the floorboard's colors had to be tweaked, not changed, just tweaked. But then I messed up the layers, so I couldn't change a specific floorboard layer by dragging colors to the plane. So I had to redo it, but it was fine. It didn't take long. I was already getting better at coloring. And I also redid the entire main table, dining table area, because I thought the colors didn't look right. And sometimes we just have to make that decision to not let go and redo whatever that we want to redo and be better. Since this was the main focus of the entire piece, I just couldn't let go and I had to do it again. It was fine, it didn't take that long. Now, adding carpets. It has always been one of my tactics to add variety and enrich the picture. But the problem is, of course, carpets are usually not in one single color. It has patterns, it has weaving, whatever that's called. Sometimes that causes problems in how detailed you are supposed to depict your carpets. And in here, I just chose to give it some lines and let it sit there and be like that. The same problem goes with wood. Whatever wood that you have, whether it's wooden floorboards or wooden furniture, table especially, it has wood grains. So the question is whether to put in those wood grains, and if so, how much, what color, how thick, how repetitive. And I have no answer to this. If you have any answer, please let me know. I don't know. I just sort of go with the flow, and if it's ugly, I'll leave it there so that at least I did something. As for the sky, I chose this yellowy, pinkish, orangey sky color to represent its tea time. It's close to dusk. Is that dusk? Twilight? Anyway, sunset. It has rationale behind it. Otherwise, you can't possibly justify the light coming in almost horizontally into the little house hall, as I call it. And it also serves as this contrast with the blue shadowing that I already have in place and can't really change because all my colors have been applied with reference to this blue shadow. So it gives this warm feeling. It's this cozy, friendly environment that you can feel free to come in. And at this juncture, I'd also like to make a record of how I deal with the ugly face. Basically, this video, you just listen to me talking about my struggles and how difficult it is. When I say I deal with the ugly face, what I really mean is just to ignore the ugly face and trust that by the end of the process, you will get something remotely close to your imagination. I'm sure there will be artists who are very experienced or perhaps very talented who can draw what they envision in their head, but I am one of those people who hardly have any visions in my head before I start and even after I finish. So there you go, that's me. And if you're watching this video, you're probably an amateur like me as well. With the rise of technology becoming more prevalent, more easily accessible to the masses, Procreate is only just 72 Hong Kong dollars. That's nothing, provided that you have an iPad. And I'd say it's worth the investment if you are not someone who deals with a lot of word processing. I am persuaded that an iPad can in fact replace a laptop. And on Instagram, we see all these young illustrators who produce good work, good, consistent work, better, much better than mine. And like me, most of them, I believe, have not received any formal academic training in design, art, drawing, or even color theory. So this video is for you all, amateurs, trying to have some skills in something you enjoy doing. Towards the end of the entire piece, I'm adding details that I either could not add because I couldn't see them being there, or that I was too lazy to add them. After all, coming up with all these random gadgets laying around is actually not that easy. I often look around my own home and my studio to find things to add to the space, and either they are repetitive objects, or I don't know how to draw them, I don't know how to place them, and I know that I said the things are supposed to be illogically placed, but they can't be too wild. They do survive or exist in this space, and you have Chad the cat here. He will make sure that things are eventually put back to where they belong. So underneath the floorboards, at the elevated floorboards, I added boxes to store their bits and bobs, and on top of books I wrote what Doe would be reading. I tried adding in the word. They didn't look good because of course you wouldn't be able to see the title of the books, they're so small. And that goes back to my point about zooming in and adding too much details. And finally, I'm just adding shadows and colors to the new items that I added, and it's basically done. I must admit that I forgot to record some of the final stages, such as, doing the sky and adding yellow to some of the outlines where the light would most prominently fall. But these are little details. My biggest regret would be not to have recorded how I drew all the posters. You can see La La Land, Les Mis, Call Me By Your Name, Pride and Prejudice. These are I've never really successfully drawn pictures on walls of my illustrations. They always come off very odd and very out of place. But this time I used the pencil and just sort of scribbled in the colors of the posters, and they turned out very well, and you can actually recognize that at least the Les Mis and La La Land, and for the rest it was too small and you couldn't possibly see. And over here for the projector, I added the image when TVs, when I was young, had no signals, it would show. At first, the way I drew it, it looked out of place as well, but I lowered the opacity and made it grayer and made it lighter as well. So now it looks kind of okay, and some people will recognize it, I'm sure. And I'm quite pleased with the kitchen counter. I added more snacks over at the bar, and I'm quite pleased with the fruits as well. They're right in the middle of the illustrations. They don't look too bad. And I have an umbrella by the door, and there's this little shed over here, and you can actually go through from the door here. It's supposed to be a toilet. And some final reflections. Next time I'd like to improve my speed, my composition, how I place my characters, and how the items, objects and placements of everything would tell a story that you can figure out on your own. And I'd also like to add items that people can do scavenger hunt, is that the word, that children can identify. Oh my god, I found it, it's right here. It's not hidden, but it takes some time for you to find that kind of exercise. It'll be fun. So that's it for now, and God knows when I will be able to produce something on this scale next, but I will try my best because it's clearly something that I truly enjoy. I actually wrote an accompanying piece to go with the illustration as well, and I'll record the voiceover later. I'm sure it will be very cringy, but anyway, it's okay. No one cares. No one really cares. No one watches these things. It's okay.